Good morning, Jean.
Good morning.
Okay. We actually, we're excited. We are here to present your book.
Thank you.
And we're actually going to talk about a very important subject. I don't think it gets enough attention. You want to introduce yourself and the book?
Yes, I'm Jean Dunstan, and I wrote a book and just published it this last November called Lost Child. And it relates the orphan train story, which many people of our generation really don't know about. And I didn't realize until years after my mother had passed away that that is exactly what had happened to her. She told me a lot of stories, the term "they haunted me" type of deal, but she died when I was young. And I finally found some, I would say, supporting evidence along with her stories and realized that that was the first part of her journey.
Okay. Now, for the viewers who don't know you personally other than the book, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because I know you've been in several countries, right?
Well, I've been in several countries. I've also lived in several states. If someone were to ask me where did you grow up, probably it would be Southern California. Okay. Although I also lived in New York City, Minnesota, Nevada, moved around numerous times in my childhood and lived with different people.
Okay, now your book is set, I think you told me, 1915, around that time?
Yes, well actually it starts with my mother being abandoned in a foundling home in New York City in 1915 as a baby. And as I said, we later verified that information. And she was never adopted, so by the time the children got to be around age 10, 12, they just didn't know what to do. New York City was overrun with immigrant, homeless children. They could not feed them, they couldn't take care of them. She was probably lucky because she was in an orphanage. They sent her to the Midwest on the orphan train, and quite frankly, she was one of the children that kind of got lost in that system.
In the system, and that's a good thing that you bring up, because the story or it's set in 1915, but the actual theme, it's relevant now because we have a lot of misinformation or lack of information.
Right.
Sometimes we don't know what happens to these kids, or how do you go about adopting one. There's a lot of stigma about the whole issue. So it's a good thing that you're bringing awareness. Many people don't know this story.
No, most of the younger generation have never heard of it at all. And it's interesting because the actual movement went from about 1830 to 1929. Over 200,000 children were sent to homes in the Midwest, to the farming countries, because at that time rural America needed workers, especially the boys. They picked them up, immediately, and they were worked as farm laborers. She worked as a farm laborer. She also did housekeeping and child care. And I asked her one day, I said, "So why did you run away?" And she just said, "I couldn't take it anymore."
Okay. Now, your style of writing, how would that be described? You said it was historical saga.
Yeah, it's historical fiction. I had to do it under that classification because it's so long ago that I did not have specific proof of every single thing. We finally got her birth certificate when she was 39. And that gave me some more information, but basically years ago they did not release any information at all about children that were raised in orphanages, nothing.
Right. Now, interesting thing, when you write, now I ask this, I usually ask, do you have your own style? Like, for example, during the day, do you have a method? How do you write?
Well, actually I don't really have a method. Fortunately, I just retired from 37 years as a realtor where I ran 7 days and 7 nights a week. Now I'm kind of readjusting. So what I do is when it hits me, I just sit down and start writing.
Okay. Now, here in town, they actually did a interview with you, right?
Yes, they did.
for the local newspaper, and they're featuring that book.
Yes.
How was your experience with that?
I was very excited. Actually, a friend of mine told a gentleman at the newspaper about the topic of my book, and they were interested in it, I believe, because of the fact that most people didn't know about the orphan train. And I have to say that the book also goes into her mother's life and my life as a teenager.
Okay. Now, what would you say, other than that historical, the story, getting the story out, did you have any other inspiration or any other push for writing?
Well, actually, the term "the stories haunted me" has that's where it came from. Because as a young girl, I heard all these bizarre stories, which I couldn't even fathom, even though we were moving around a lot and we had certain, difficulties. She was a single parent, and she was an amazing woman. I think that the main thing is that I felt like she had a story, and I needed to tell it. I wasn't sure how, I didn't know if I could do it, but I've always written for years.
So you wanted to be her voice?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you find any similarities with the foster system back in that time now? Like, what would you discuss as far as?
Well, my theory is, as in every situation, there are good parts and negative parts.
Right.
And so even with today's system, I have been familiar with kids that have bounced around from place to place and never really found a family. On the other hand, I know young people who have been taken in and lovingly cared for by people who wanted children and wanted to give back. So it's a dichotomy.
Right, and I think we were discussing that there's two sides to that. There's always unfortunately the bad situations, but there's always the good stories that you're mentioning.
One of the requirements with the children on the orphan train was that the area minister or priest was supposed to check in on the children at regular times just to make sure they were okay. The problem was that they were sent out to very distant farm areas and situations where people did not check on them. And in my mother's case, in one place where she stayed, if the people thought the minister was coming, she had to sit in a closet and stay hidden in a closet for the whole time because they didn't want her to say anything bad or ask about getting away. It was very tragic. So, but I have to say that from what I understand about the system today, those things are also happening in the system today. I mean, similar type of deal.
Right. And it's a good thing that you, like I say, you bring awareness, because this is how conversations start. So if there is a way in this that we need to change in the system, or if it's something that we need to address, this is how you start it. You bring awareness to somebody, and then the conversation starts. So that's that's a good thing. Now, for people who maybe are starting to write, they maybe written something, but they don't know how to go about it. What advice would you give somebody who's maybe unsure? Maybe it's somebody young who doesn't know if their writing is good enough. Maybe it's somebody older that they've written, but they never really publish anything. Based on your experience, what would you tell that writer? Well,
I've written for years, and this was my first book that was published. I have files of stories I've written. I think you have to find a group that you can join where you can share thoughts and learn. I also took a creative writing class at the junior college here. That was extremely helpful. I think most of my motivation at this point, however, has come from being part of a writers group here.
Okay. What motivation do they give you? What do you feel?
Well, I think the most interesting thing was in the group that I'm involved in at this point is that we're free to ask questions. People talk about the very basic things. They share how they published their book. They're also, all of them, very helpful. I think that was the biggest thing, because I am a very detail-oriented person, and so I ask a lot of questions, which can be quite annoying, obviously.
Right, and you were mentioning that you were in real estate, so you basically, you know, you look at contracts, you're very...
Everything had to be perfect. Right. I had to get away from that, by the way. I had a terrible time not critiquing every single sentence because I wasn't getting along very far.
Now, I understand this was self-published, right?
Yes.
How has your experience with the self-published experience have been, or what would you say?
Well, actually, it's been excellent. I didn't go into this planning on being a New York Times bestseller type of deal. At my age, worrying about finding a publisher and so on wasn't even a thought. The majority of the people that I know today are self-publishing, and it's worked out fine.
Right, and I think some people would agree with you that sometimes you don't go into writing maybe because of the monetary gain. Yeah, it will be there, you know, if you get better at it. But I think sometimes you just have a story to tell.
Yes. And
you need to get it out, and sometimes that is the push, right?
Oh yeah, in fact, at this point, the book is with Amazon in a program called KDP Select. What I'm very thrilled about is that they released this story to people internationally, and at this point, in 4 months, over 3,000 people have read it. Doesn't mean that I got paid for it. It means that 3,000 people actually read my mother's story and the story about the orphan trimming.
How does that make you feel? That 3,000
I'm very happy. Okay. I'm very, very thrilled.
Okay. All right, Jean. So, so we went over the questions about your background and everything. Is there anything that you want to say to the readers if they haven't read your book?
Well, thank you for reading it and for giving me the opportunity to share, I think, a rather important story having to do with our country's history. And I'm most appreciative for anyone that reads it, so thank you.
Well, actually, we would like to thank you for bringing that awareness. You know, some stories, they need to be told, and especially one as important as this one. So
well,
thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.